Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks where kindred souls gather together to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as the February Room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for composite development fly rods and accessories. 40 years of Kiwi ingenuity and graphite technology, now available at cd-fishing.us or your local CD USA dealer. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And remember to go fishing. Here's your host, the Carnops, and this is the February Room.
On December 1st, one of the premier trout fisheries in the West, the Madison River, went from 640 cubic feet per second to 200. With water levels dropping during the trout spawn, people had to act quickly to save a river that they love. One of those people is Bill Pfeiffer, outreach coordinator for Montana Trout Unlimited. Bill was at ground zero and can explain what exactly happened on one of our most beloved rivers. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bill.
I am happy to join you. Thanks so much for having me, Lauren.
And as I had said, the Madison River is a very beloved river. And maybe before we kind of go into the information of what exactly happened on December 1st, you can kind of share a story about what makes this river so special to you.
Sure. The Madison is really special to me. I think one of the most memorable days I ever had fishing in Montana was on the Madison. A long time ago now. Really makes me realize just how long it's been that I've lived here.
Wow.
But yeah, I had a really magical day on the Upper Madison, among many, honestly. I've had many great days in the Upper Madison, but I think my favorite day would have been a day my best friend and I just happened to catch a Mother's Day caddis hatch from the beginning to the end. We got to fish all stages of the hatch, and it's certainly, I think, the most trout I've ever caught in one day in Montana that I'm aware of. It was just a really special day. I think Chris caught his biggest brown trout that day, like 2 or 3 times over. Like, we kept stopping to take pictures because he was like, I think this one's bigger than the last one.
Just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and I mean, this was before most of us had smartphones, so all the pictures I have from that day were shot on film, on my old 35 millimeter, and I still get those photos out once in a while to look at them. But it's a pretty magical place, and I think we really got to see just how much people love this river, not just here in Montana, but all around the world.
Well, and like as I said, I mean, it is really one of the most premier places to go fishing in the West. Justin and I went fishing there not too long ago, this past summer. And what I love about the Madison is just how the locals in that area, they are so incredible. Like, I know how people like Montanans can be pretty not wanting to share their information or their love. But when we were there, we had so many locals coming up to us, giving us tips on what to use. And so it's just a really magical place. So maybe you can give us some information on what exactly happened on December 1st.
Sure. So, our understanding of what happened is that basically there's a rod that basically raises and lowers the gate on the dam. And one of those rods for one of the gates snapped. I don't know if they, I'm sure we're going to find out more about, maybe why that happened. I mean, it is an old dam. And basically what happened when that happened was the river essentially, got reduced by more than half. And so, the main impacts, I'd say the most severe impacts to the river were definitely in the section between the lakes. It's commonly what we call it, between the lakes. It's the stretch of the river that flows in between Hebgen Dam and Quake Lake, which was formed by the landslide from the earthquake in the 50s. So, that's where the main impacts were felt, especially immediately. It kind of took a good period of time for those flows then to start to impact further down the river. most of the impacts below Quake Lake were limited to side channels. And I'd say most of the impacts in general were limited to the side channels. But basically what happened was the fish didn't really have a chance to know that they needed to move to deeper water. And so we had a lot of fish that got stranded. I think a lot of the larger fish got moved pretty quickly by people, by the locals who were working on it right away. But we were part of a very large effort to move some of those juvenile fish as well.
Well, and I was reading actually an article written by Sam Lundgren from Meat
Mm-hmm.
Eater. And what's interesting is reading about the, is it Hebgen Dam? Am I
Yeah, Hebgen
pronouncing
Dam and Hebgen
Heb?
Lake, yes.
Is that there seemed that there was Northwestern Energy had some tools to let them know like when levels were going lower. And at
Mm-hmm.
one point it seemed like maybe someone thought it was just a malfunction of the alert telling them that that was going on. Is
Yeah, and I
that
think
correct?
I don't know. I don't really have that information. I don't know what they were getting on the ground. I do think that we frequently have stream gauge malfunctions. I think this brings up a different issue, which
Yeah.
might be for a whole. I mean, we could probably have a whole nother podcast on this, but just the fact that USGS sites in Montana and I think all around the country are losing funding. And these sites are really important. But further, I mean, not to digress too much, but it's very possible, I know from checking USGS sites every day, that sometimes they just malfunction.
Yeah.
Um, Indeed, we actually had some people commenting online on Wednesday or on Tuesday who were like, isn't it just the gauge? Are you guys sure that people were like, yeah, we're standing next to the river. We're pretty sure it's not the gauge. But I think the thing that's concerning for us was the response time.
Yes. Wasn't it like 12 hours?
It was a while before people took action, and I can't really speak to it, like I said, without the benefits of more information. But from my perspective, especially, it seemed like the response time was the major issue. Um, I think we have to be careful and find out what exactly happened before we start I guess pointing fingers too much.
Sure.
Then that's not to say that there shouldn't be accountability for something if something happened. uh, you know the main electrofisher in my crew was a Northwestern Energy employee, so he was out there and was as dedicated to moving those fish as we were. um, you know Obviously he's a biologist, so he probably doesn't interact much with people in the dam engineering department. So it's we'll have to wait and see what exactly happened. But we definitely need to think. I think start to consider about how do we respond to these sorts of things, because there was just a lot of misinformation running around that day, and it could be solved if we had a better way, a better, more planned response for these sorts of incidents.
Well, and it's almost kind of like the boy that cried wolf, right? When
Hmm.
machines keep going down, you're probably like, it's a malfunction. Promise you, like there's no way the water is dropping that low. But it does seem like maybe the dam has some infrastructure that needs some updating. And it's
Yeah,
crazy because didn't they have to go to Anaconda to get the piece made in order to like fix
yeah,
it?
and I think that's actually a good thing. I mean, I think they actually were able to find somebody, relatively close to the dam who was able to fabricate the piece. I
Wow.
think, I was actually pretty impressed, I think, with how they handled it. I mean, pretty scary job, I think, to put on a wetsuit and scuba gear and dive down, maybe over 100 feet into a malfunctioning dam. Not a job I would
Terrifying.
want. And I mean, I thought it was pretty amazing that they were able to just build a new piece and get it installed. I think, like I said, from our perspective, the issue is more, hey, we definitely have a problem here, and we need to be able to transmit that to you guys as quickly as possible. The last time, it's kind of interesting. Somebody was also asking me, haven't there been malfunctions with this dam in the past? And I think the last one was in 2008, if I remember correctly. And we had the opposite problem. She had too much water, and my good friend Josh DeShadow, who you can see in the photos that are included with this, he's the head guide at the Firehole Ranch in West Yellowstone, and so the Upper Madison's his backyard. It's his office, it's his place where he goes when he's not working. It's a special place for him, and it was cool that we got to work together. Having spent so many great days angling on the river, to spend the day together, trying to save the river was awesome. But he and his ex were actually fishing the day that the dam malfunctioned last time. And
it's like his ex-wife or ex-girlfriend?
Yes, his ex-wife. Yeah, I mean, they're still close, but anyway, they were fishing. I think they still fish sometimes. But yeah, they were fishing, and the sheriff showed up. Josh was like, I noticed something was wrong because logs were coming by, and that doesn't really happen on the Madison. But yeah, he was interrupted fishing by the sheriff, who was like, you need to seek higher ground, like, immediately. So
and that was back in 2008.
That was in 2008. So I think that was the last, issue that I'm aware of with Hebgen Dam. But I think this brings up, why infrastructure is so important. This is an earthquake zone. And the river's already been blocked once by an earthquake. So it's definitely something that we should, really be paying close attention to in the future.
Well, and what I thought was really interesting about when this all happened is that we also had high temperatures during that time. And in the moment, it was kind of, in Montana, I was like, this is ridiculous. We should not be
freaky,
like in
yes.
mid 60s. But then reading about how that might have actually been a good thing during this time, because then the water levels didn't freeze.
Yeah, totally.
It's weird that actually worked out. I mean, not trying to say that global warming is anything that works out, but at this time it was like, well, at least it didn't get to those freezing temperatures where those puddles would have frozen and, caused more destruction.
Yeah, for sure. It was pretty cold when we got out of the car there in the morning. But, I really think obviously we have to wait and see with the long-term impacts. As far as trout reds and trout eggs are concerned, the eggs just mainly need to be kept moist and not freezing. We have to remember that back in the 1880s, they actually put trout eggs into I don't know what they put them in. I think coffee cans or something, and shipped them across the ocean. So there's certainly some viability there still. And some of those reds, I think that was the most alarming thing for me when I showed up to the river, was just, there's a really pretty famous side channel right above the Cabin Creek campground. And it's definitely a place where a lot of big brown trout spawn. I think it's actually also the place where, if you're familiar with the old video of Jack Dennis catching the giant brown trout, or Bob Jacklin, catching the giant brown trout, I think that's where it was. But seeing that side channel, mostly dried up, and seeing all those reds in that area, that hit pretty hard, honestly. Just because it's such a big spawning area, for Quake Lake. But I also think that that's a good thing, because I think because there's so many fish in Quake Lake, there's definitely a lot of room for recovery in that stretch as well. But it was hard to see.
Well, and also, like, you kind of were talking about, like, the information about how they wanted people to help, because I was obviously keeping an eye on it. And in the beginning, they're like, please don't come. We don't want you to stop. We don't want people to come out here and step on the beds. And then all of a sudden, when things weren't getting better, it was like, no, come out here. We need volunteers.
Yeah. And I think, it was a really tough situation. I think I said that a bunch in our social media posts. But first, I first got a message from people on the ground there. And I think FWP on the ground originally, saying, hey, we could use a fish rescue here. Then I think Northwestern basically came back and was like, hey, we're not sure what the problem is, but if we get the flows turned on again, there's a safety issue here, because anybody who fishes the Madison a lot knows that bold wading is rewarded on the Madison with good fishing. And the thing is there wasn't much bold wading due to the water being down. So there was definitely, a chance for people to get stranded in places, or worse. So, then we kind of got that message from them. Hey, there's a public safety issue here. Plus, we can't do a mass education like effort right now so that everybody knows what a trout red looks like. Um,
Yes.
I think it was really, about balancing the impact. I think at a certain point we felt, we being like just this coalition of people that, we were going to get to a point of diminishing returns if we didn't try and move those fish. It was, and even now I'm kind of looking back on it, and there were definitely fish that we moved that day that, given how fast the water came back on, they probably would have been okay, depending on whether it had frozen that night or not. So it was a really tough, I think it was a tough situation because we didn't know exactly how long it was going to take for the water to get back on. It was hard to know whether to leave fish in places. We had all these people who, bless their hearts, came out to help, but I mean, they were people of varying, levels of fisheries education, as to, even what spawning fish look like. So, it was a really, I think, difficult situation, but all in all, I mean, I thought it was amazing. Everybody we saw who was working that day, was really, listening, taking directions from FWP staff and the Northwestern Energy staff who were there to help. It was pretty orderly, considering I bet over 300 people showed up to try and help, riverwide. So it was a pretty cool thing to see, and definitely a feel good story for me, like one of the feel good stories of the year, I would say.
Everything that I did read said that everyone who came together, just no matter what area, whether it was
Mm-hmm.
Northwestern Energy, whether it was, everyone came together and worked together. And it was like, let's save the river. Like, let's put whatever issues we have behind us and let's
Mm-hmm.
put our energy into this. I know you were talking about spawning fish and what trout reds look like. Can you give a
Mm-hmm.
little information about,
Sure.
for listeners who don't know what that is and what that looks like?
Sure. So, pretty much all salmonids, of which trout are a member, they lay their eggs in what's called a red. It's spelled just like the color red, but it's got an extra D. So, and the way that really works is the female trout will essentially dig out some gravel to lay her eggs in. And the reason they do this is that they really need their eggs to have a constant supply of fresh oxygen, in order for those eggs to stay viable. And so what they do is they use their tail, their whole body in general, to clean all of that sediment and little algae and all that stuff out of the gravel so that they can lay their eggs in a nice, clean, well aerated place. Usually if you're walking the river, and you want to, a lot of fish, especially brown trout, they'll look to like the tails of pools, which is a scary thing because that's where people like to cross the river. And that's where I like to cross the river, is where it's shallow and not too swift. And those are also happen to be places where trout really like to lay their eggs. So anytime you're walking the river and you see a patch of completely clean gravel that's a depression, that where all the gravel around it still has like that algae coat on it, it's a really good sign that that's probably a red. And it's just good practice to not walk in it, don't step in it, and also don't step in the pillow of gravel that's behind it, that the fish kind of kicks up, because a lot of the eggs end up getting into that pillow of gravel. And so when the female lays her eggs, the male comes in and fertilizes those eggs, and there's all sorts of cool things we could talk about with that process, but I'll leave that to John McMillan, who does a much better job of describing it than me.
Those are just good reminders, though, because as anglers, you sometimes look at like where the fly needs to go or where you're,
Mm-hmm.
but you're never really thinking about where your feet are stomping on. And
Yep.
so it does probably give you another reminder. This whole situation gives you a reminder of how, as anglers and people who love the river, like how delicate the ecosystem is and how it can change drastically within 12 hours. I mean, it could have been more dramatic than what it sounds.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I think
happening.
that was one of the things I said right away. I mean, when we crossed, we got into Ennis about a little before 9, and I had missed the break off point at the grocery store, but Josh had hooked up with a crew that was going up to between the lakes, and so I had been communicating with him, and I was like, well, we'll join you, and then we can do some social media with that group, and obviously that's where the impact's the greatest and probably where we're needed. So that's where we went. But when we crossed the bridge in Ennis, I looked over the side of the bridge and I was like, well, it's low, but I mean, there's water in the river. And I think that was kind of like, that was, that was kind of, very, I guess I felt a big sense of relief, cause
Yeah.
I wasn't sure just how bad it was going to be, um, and it felt good to see that there was water in the river. I immediately took a photo when we were running up there. You have really intermittent cell service there, which is wonderful.
Yes.
I actually enjoy it most of the time.
Me
Um,
too.
but you get a little bit of service kind of near Palisades for a split second there, and so I took a photo of Palisades, just because I was like, hey, there's still water in the river, people. Like, because we were getting people calling from all over the world, being like, how bad is it? Once we got up near $3, you could start to see the impacts more. Side channels that weren't flowing anymore, but still had a little bit of water in them, maybe. That kind of thing. But when we got up between the lakes, it was like pretty, yeah, pretty stark. So, but I
Did
think
you see
it's,
a lot of dead fish?
I didn't, I do think that some dead fish were actually arranged for photos, which,
Okay, because
I can
there was some
understand,
fish
but
I saw that were like piled together. I'm like,
hmm
oh my gosh, are they just all laying on the side of the bank? And
yeah. I mean, we certainly lost some fish. I mean, there's definitely some fish that died, adult fish. This wasn't just a thing that impacted, a lot of these brown trout that were spawning were already super stressed out. It's a very taxing process for them to spawn. And so, a few of the larger brown trout we moved into the main channel, you could tell that they were, they needed to start eating again and rest. And a lot of the fish we saved, though, were juveniles. I think probably most of the fish we saved were sculpin. Just an incredible number of sculpin in the Madison. If you're a streamer angler, I don't think there's many other flies I would tie on in the Madison based on what I saw.
you're like, it took a new level of reading the
If
water.
if you're looking for an attractor response, maybe not. But if you're looking to imitate the forage, sculpin's probably a pretty good bet. We did get into some of the side channels below Cabin Creek, and we did find quite a few juvenile trout in those channels, and we're able to move quite a few. I think Josh, John, and I were able to move probably 300 to 400 trout out of the one on the river left side. And we had a backpack shocker, which made it a lot easier. Honestly, it was really difficult because nets were hard to use. The puddles were so shallow, it was really difficult to be able to even get a net underneath like a fingerling trout. So it was really kind of all hands literally on deck. Keep your hands wet. If you see one, try and grab it as soon as you can. I mean, there were many that we couldn't get. I mean, it's amazingly hard to catch trout even when they're stunned.
Yeah.
um, so I can tell you that from just being a fish tech for years before I got into conservation. But pretty cool though, just to see, I think, how well people did just with the whole process in general. It was pretty incredible.
Did you have to like dunk them in water for a little bit before to get to get them like moving
Yeah,
and
so
then put them in the water?
there was definitely the electroshock basically stuns them. It kind of depends on the fish and how close they are to the electrodes as to how long they're stunned for. We were carrying buckets, and so we were basically just throwing them in the buckets to recover. When most of the fish in the bucket had recovered, we'd immediately take them out to the main river, cross over the island wherever we were, and dump them in the main river. So some of those fish, I'm sure probably didn't survive that process, but a lot of them did. And certainly we save them from, predation from,
Yeah.
who knows, all sorts of herons, raccoons, you name it. I'm sure bears would get in there and eat them. I
Hmm.
mean,
Ennis has a lot of bears.
yep. So, yeah, we were thinking about having bear spray on us, but I was like, it's pretty cold. I think they're probably asleep, but
I swear there's a reason why at elk camp now, because we kind of go in grizzly country. And actually, I think that's where they technically, and it's near that area, that's where they leave all the problem bears that are just,
yeah.
and they like
Oh,
leave them
good.
out there. And I told Justin, I'm like, listen, I am not sleeping in a tent. I smell good. I feel good. No, but
I'd rather know what's going to happen to me.
yeah, I'm like, oh gosh. And so, that is all just so real things that are happening. You are in Ennis is also off the map, still very isolated from big cities, really.
Hmm.
So it's good to hear that a community of people, because as Justin and I were sitting here getting the news, I was like, do you need to drive down there? Then it'd be
Hmm.
like, hold off. I was like, well, let's just give it a few minutes, because it did seem that at any moment the water was going to be turned on.
Yeah, in that respect, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the Missoula avalanche from what about a decade
Yes.
ago now? But during that day, it was kind of the same thing. Like something bad happens, that really brings people together. Everybody wants to rush down there and help.
Yes.
But at the same time, like you have to ask yourself: are you going to improve the situation? Are you going to make this a better situation? Um,
Or add to the
and or
chaos
add
of
to the
the whole
chaos
situation.
of the
Yeah.
situation. And I mean, that was ultimately the decision I came to with the Missoula avalanche. Is I had a few friends that were on working for the Avalanche Center at that time, and I was like, I thought I might just cause more problems, and they were like, thanks, because people were digging holes that were filling other holes that people were digging, and um, you just have
Yeah.
to, in a crisis situation like that, and maybe that's really what the lesson from this should be, is that we really should consider some kind of a emergency fisheries response, so that we have tools available, in case things like this happen. So there's a chain of command, there's I think that's
Absolutely.
really what the one takeaway from this for me, aside from how awesome it is and how much people love the Madison, um,
Right.
is that, we really need some kind of a way to deal with these situations so that they're controlled, and that, we're doing the best thing for the fishery.
Well, and especially when you have so many other organizations involved, it's hard to
Hmm.
figure out who's going to be the chief of operations of because each one has their own person that's in charge. It reminds
Hmm.
me of actually, what there should be is I worked on a show called Backcountry Rescue, and it was on the Teton Rescue, and these are all volunteers, and each person had their role. There was a helicopter, there was a chief of operations, there was the map coordinator. And maybe if we end up having all volunteer based on Madison River, like if something goes down, this is the chief of operations, this is the biologist on hand. And
Hmm.
maybe we can start thinking of something like that, because that's just strictly for the Madison River and also the Clark Fork River, is because I think what we're realizing is with the Hebgen Dam is that there's a lot of infrastructure and dams that really, if they fail, it can be catastrophic.
Yep, it sure can. It sure can. And that's definitely one of the reasons we supported the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Is there's a lot in there. There's a lot in infrastructure that has a lot to do with trout. Most people think of infrastructure as being, a highway, a road, a bridge.
A bridge, yeah.
But even a bridge, just in how we build a bridge, there's fisheries considerations there. So dams are obviously, a big part of that. And we have several in Montana that are on, top notch fisheries. So, by all means, I think we need to make sure that these structures are up to code, and that maintenance is getting done as it should be.
So what is our confidence level right now with the Hebgen Dam? Do we feel like it's
I,
going to be okay for
I
this?
can't speak to that. I mean, this was a gate malfunction. I think that's important to remember. There's a big part of this dam that was not affected by this in any way. It's the part that holds the water back. But I really don't, I don't want to speculate too much
Yeah.
on that. That's not my place. But, I know a lot of people are calling for that, to be investigated. And, I think that we all have an interest in making sure these pieces of infrastructure are sound and, are up to date and ready for events like a potential earthquake, in the
Yeah.
Yellowstone region. There was a small earthquake before this malfunction. So I know there was some speculation that might have had something to do with it from a few people.
Really? I
Um,
had no clue that happened.
yeah, it was a very small one.
Okay. We always read those newspapers that says, when is Yellowstone going to blow? And
Hmm.
it says which areas will be completely destroyed. And I know I'm in the completely destroyed area as well as you are.
An earthquake, yes, we should be prepared for. If Yellowstone blows up, I think Hebgen Dam will be the least of our problems.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about the end of the world now. Now
We're
just go.
talking
It
about
started.
we might be vaporized before we even know the dam's gone. So.
We're talking about it went from Hebgen Dam to now just the whole world is just but
Yeah.
it is hard when things start to malfunction like that it just
Hmm.
seems like the whole world is starting to fall apart. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to, I know that the dams are getting older and things need to be, the infrastructure needs to be updated, but it's hard when you have temperatures are higher than they've ever been, and
Hmm.
then you have a dam that's breaking. You're like, what else? You have the virus. It just feels like right now the earth is like screaming at us, like, take better care of me. And especially
Certainly.
now with the loss of obviously some fish that we will see, what is your role going to be, or what is Trout Unlimited going to be wanting to see come spring?
Well, I mean, I probably should have started the whole podcast with this, but, Montana Trout Unlimited, we're the state council for all 13 chapters here in the state of Montana. Our mission is to conserve, protect, and restore Montana's cold water fisheries and their watersheds. And, we're a very science-based organization. I guess that's what we would like to see. We would like to see us lead with science on this
Yes,
issue. There's a
always.
lot of social issues going on in the Madison right now with use. And, there's a big part of that is aesthetic. It's an aesthetic thing. There's probably parts of that are a biological impact at the same time. But really, we're a science-based organization and we're concerned about the fishery. And so, I think any response we would like to see should be based, on the biology and what our fisheries managers are seeing on the ground. From our personal perspective, I think, we're really supporting a voluntary closure of the Madison for the winter. Not the entire river, but, at least the areas that were impacted by this dewatering event. You mentioned this could have been worse. It certainly could have been worse if it happened in the summer. We would have had a much greater impact, at least on adult and juvenile fish.
Yeah.
Just because of water temperatures would have skyrocketed in those dewatered areas. And there would not have been very much oxygen in that water. The fish would have survived for a much shorter period of time. So, we're really just asking folks to, take it upon themselves to give the Madison a little break, especially, above $3 bridge, and let those fish recover. FWP did have an emergency closure on the river for a number of days during the event. And basically what they used to do that closure was our emergency drought rules. So when the river, dropped below, that target flow, they were able to close it immediately. The problem with using that regulation then is that once the flows are back up, you're no longer hitting that trigger. So any, more lengthy official closure of the Madison would have to go through a more formal rulemaking process. It would involve the Fish and Game Commission. I think it's, I don't know what their tools are that they do have to use, but it might take them a while to implement them, even if they did so choose to implement them. And so for that reason, we're just, basically asking people, hey, There's a bunch of great places to fish in the middle of the winter in Montana.
Hmm.
There's a ton of them. And so, if you're looking to do some midwinter fishing this year, give those fish a break. It'll certainly help the reds out for you not to be walking around the river. It'll let some of those fish that were stressed out from that event, recover without, having any hooking mortality going on in that stretch. So, um, it's basically just what I asked Clayton Elliott, our government affairs director, about this and what he thought of the idea. And he's like, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I really think that's it, so, we all have a hunting and fishing ethic, and that involves fair chase. And I think that these fish have earned a little break from us for a little while. So we just respectfully ask that if you're going to go fishing, find a different place, maybe fish downriver on the Madison if you're stuck in that area or whatever.
Absolutely. Even this summer, when the water was so warm and it still wasn't shut down, I remember Jess and I just walked down to the Clark Fork just to see what the temperature was, and it
Mm-hmm.
was at 10 o'clock. It was warm, and
Yep.
I just thought to myself, how in the world could a fish survive this, get caught, and then put back in this warm water? There's no way. So I think what you said is just do the right thing
Mm-hmm.
is about sometimes the rules aren't there, and you are allowed to do it, but just do what's right. And
Yeah, and we saw that this summer. I mean, we saw that
yeah,
this summer across the board. I mean, I did get some stories from people who were like, I saw someone putting in at one, and most of those people were, a family or something like that.
yeah,
A lot of people were self-regulating this summer. And I think,
absolutely.
it's probably a subject for a whole nother show, honestly. But, one thing that we're really trying to keep the focus on, I mentioned this before we kind of went live, but um the drought's not over, obviously, but it's not hot out anymore. So
Hmm.
we want to keep the focus on drought, even though it's not hot anymore, even though we're able to fish all day now, because one, we're not out of this drought yet. It's starting to look a little better this morning, but we're not out of this drought yet, number one. Number two, these droughts are going to keep happening, more and more frequently, and we need to be prepared for them. So, the two things that MTU is working on with regard to that, is one, doing a better job with our hoot owl regulations,
Yes.
updating them if we can, making them more responsive. From my perspective, I like to see them consider minimum temperatures or a mean temperature, because a lot of times we're not getting water temperatures dropping low enough in the evening hours to really give the fish much of a break. So even though they're technically below 65 degrees, they're not below 65 degrees for more than like an hour or two. So that's one thing that we're really interested in looking into, is how can we give our fisheries managers more flexibility to institute those closures and then to remove them when they're no longer needed. And then the second thing is really, and it is actually encouraging to us to see some movement from the governor's office on this, but drought management planning. All of us use the river, everybody.
Yes.
We all need that water. And so, we know we live in a state with prior appropriation as far as water law is concerned, but that really necessitates the fact of bringing as many people as possible to the table to plan for these droughts. The Jefferson, I think, is a good example. Yes, the impacts were terrible on the Jefferson this summer with the drought. But in 1988, without drought management planning, the Jefferson dried up. This year, there was a little bit of water in the Jefferson, and the reason there was a little bit of water in the Jefferson was because of the people who made that decision to come together to try and keep some water in the river. We'd like to see more watershed-based, drought management planning. The Smith is a really high priority watershed for us. Seeing the float season there close so early this year was scary. That's one of the reasons I'm going to have Montana Fly Fishing Connection guys on to talk about this on Wednesday night on our Instagram channel or Instagram Live. But that's another focus area for us. We want to see regulations that are actually responsive and protecting the fishery in real time, and forward thinking drought management planning, so that the next time we have a severe drought, we can do a better job of working together to keep more water in the river.
So when you're talking about like drought management, and sorry, because I'm not really well versed in this, but you're talking about what to do when the drought happens, or how do we keep water flowing?
I think it's both.
Okay.
From my perspective, it's both. From it's definitely important to bring everybody to the table. Irrigators, outdoorsmen, and women. Bring as many different parties to the table as possible. But it's really about shared sacrifice. It really is. It comes down to that, and like everybody gives a little bit, and that puts a little more water in the river. The other tools we have are in-stream flows. That's something that both Trout Unlimited at the national level and Montana TU continues to work on, is finding ways to increase in-stream flows, retiring water rights, changing water rights, making a change of use to in-stream flow from
Yes.
an irrigation use. It's often called like the death of 1,000 cuts, but it's kind of like the healing of 1,000, I don't know, Band-Aids maybe.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Each one of these little, couple CFS at a time, when you add all that stuff up, it makes a difference.
Because there's some really old dated rules and regulations, especially when it comes to irrigation, that in order to be considered a farmer, you need to use this much water.
You have to use it or you lose it. That's kind
Yeah,
of
use
a
it or lose it.
long-standing, Western water law tenet. First in time is first in right. So the first person to file, has seniority, and then use it or lose it is the other one. If you don't use it, then somebody else, obviously, the original thinking was someone else should be able to use it. I don't want to get too into water rights. My
Right.
boss, David Brooks, just did a great podcast on the Orvis podcast. You can check
Oh,
it out,
wonderful.
where he gets into the more the nitty gritty of Montana water law. I did go to law school and study water law, but I don't keep it fresh in my brain. So,
Oh, once I graduated school, I think I lost all of my algebra, cosine, tangent. No, you can't tell me how fast a train's coming
I
right
mean,
now.
the odds of us making a large scale change to Montana water law, I would say, are slim.
Okay.
However, I think the opportunities for us to improve DMPs, as we call them, drought management plans for specific watersheds, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think that there's going to be more buy-in,
Yeah.
just because this is a reality. It's not going away. It's going to keep happening. And just like with the water compact on the Flathead Reservation, it is beneficial for people to know how much water they're going to have. Like if they can plan ahead for it, even if it's not going to be what they want, if they can plan for it, that's good,
Right.
so
Knowledge is power.
yep, exactly. And so, that's really what our policy focus is. I'd say is trying to keep that focus on the drought, remind people, this is a wild trout management state. All of our trout streams are, majority wild reproduction. And so we have to manage our rivers for that. We can't just throw more trout in. We have to give them the conditions that they need to reproduce. And that's what's put us on the map as like one of the number one fishing destinations for trout in the entire world, is that very thing. So,
Well, and the other thing is, when those water temperatures get really high, I mean, there's some other options that you can do as Montanans to enjoy the
oh,
outdoors.
totally. I
You
go
know,
bass fishing. It
I was about
bugs
to
my
say pike
boss.
fishing. Justin loves pike fishing. He loves popping those things on the head.
He was like, it's maybe we shouldn't say that you're a bass fisherman on your bio on the website. And I'm like, hey, I love bass fishing. I grew up doing it, and that's how I learned to fly fish. Because
Me
so
too. Perch, and then all of a sudden, so I've caught largemouth, but just recently smallmouth
Smallmouth
is,
are awesome, man.
I was like, why is this not been part of my life now? I'm obsessed with it. I keep asking Justin, I'm like, when I want to go smallmouth, he's like, oh, you'd love tarpon. I'm like, oh, you bring it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I trout fish 90% of the time, but when it gets really hot in the summer, um, yeah, I certainly go to look for
And pike,
warm and cool water species. Pike make great tacos.
that's what I was just about to
Um,
say. I mean, they taste amazing. Our freezer is full now, and we have some fish on top of it. It's like a surf and turf paradise. On come.
yeah, or does Justin do the pickle? Does he pickle them?
No, I've never even heard of pickling.
Oh, so yeah, this is something I haven't tried it too much yet, but if if you pickle the pike, it actually helps dissolve a lot of those bones, so you don't even have to do like the special filleting technique or anything. You can just leave the Y bones in, and like over time, the acids just kind of dissolve those bones.
No
But
way.
it's quite tasty. And yeah, it's basically like adding a protein punch to anything. You can just kind of break some up and
I'm gonna have to have him try it because he does the special. His good buddy Bill Owens taught him
Mhm.
how to fillet without the bones. But sometimes we'll be sitting at the table and we'll be like with the kids, like just make sure when you chew, just
Be
chew and
careful.
don't just swallow.
Yep.
Don't want to get a bone lodged in there. With the Madison, the plan is that Trout Unlimited's going to go out there, assess. Will there be more information coming like in the next like year or so that we'll see? Hey, this is what needs to happen. Let's keep our distance. Like, what's the next plan?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly monitoring that. We work really closely with our fisheries folks at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Our main source of information that we were using to share throughout that process was coming from the biologists. And so, like I said, we're going to continue to rely on what they see. I think that this was a wake up call for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
On just, I think we've been concerned about the health of the Madison fishery and just all the fisheries in Southwest Montana, due to recent trends. So, hopefully this will embolden, and encourage people to want to protect that resource. So if we get new information on it, we will certainly be sharing it. And we'll certainly be closely monitoring what can be done in the future. Likely that's going to end up being a legislative issue, so it probably will come into play the next time our legislator sits. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something from one of the legislators basically looking to avoid these situations in the future in some way, shape, or form. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I think we're definitely going to have some impacts to this year's recruitment of brown trout, at least in the upper river. But we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Some of those eggs might have made it. It's hard to say. It was pretty variable situation. Some reds were submerged the whole time. Some weren't. Some might have frozen. Who knows? We'll see.
Man, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I
I
will
know.
say there's a bunch of brown trout in Quake Lake. They're going to spawn again. So these, trout are really well adapted to extreme events like this. If you know anything about steelhead, they space out the timing of their spawn. They space out where they spawn. They have so many different life histories, and probably a lot that we don't even know, honestly, just because we haven't really
Yeah.
studied them in Montana. Native fish get studied a lot, but a
Right.
lot of our non-native fish, we don't really study them all that much. But yeah, I think it remains to be seen. But I'm sure some of these brown trout. I mean, there were brown trout that had already spawned and left, and probably already had eggs that hatched. There were brown trout that probably hadn't even come in to spawn yet, and they do that. They do that to increase their chances of survival. So we'll just have to wait and see what surveys say, I guess, in the future.
Yeah. Well, I think it's still important as a human being to always look at the cup is half full,
For
that
sure.
we can still do some more. Because if, like I said, when all of this was going down, I was like, what is next? Like, this is just awful. I feel awful. What's going on? And I think sometimes you need to take a break and try and be positive. Like, this could have been worse. We now know that there's some infrastructure going on with the Hebgen Dam. Let's all take a time to, like you said, the way that what you realize is that maybe there needs to be better protocols of like what happens when something like this
Yeah, for
happens. Like, what is
sure.
this going to look like? Let's have a game plan.
Yeah, we need a
Just
game
kind of
plan.
like if there's a fire, if you have a fire in your house, you all talk with your family members. This is how we leave the house safely, and this is our
Exactly.
meeting spot. And maybe we just need to just have even a meeting spot and figure out where we're going to meet and what actions will be taking place and what numbers need to be called. Because I think also reading that was that Northwestern Energy was just calling the landline,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, can we just directly talk to someone? This is an actual emergency on your
Yeah,
machines. And so
exactly.
maybe now that that's happened, that will change, and I hope that it does. I know that you said that you have some live events coming this Wednesday.
Yep.
This podcast will be airing on Tuesday, so they will be
Oh.
missing this news. Is there a way that this will be recorded that they can listen to earlier, and also ways that they can keep in touch with you and also Montana Trout Unlimited?
For sure. You can follow us, of course, on Instagram, Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. We will be doing an Instagram live event on Wednesday night. It's a little fly tying and conservation talk about the Smith River with some longtime Smith River guides, getting their perspective on just the drought and how it's affected the river. And we will be posting that into our feed. So if you missed the live, you can catch up at a later time in our Instagram feed. And kind of working towards getting a podcast going, but we'll see. I'm slowly dipping my toes in.
Just dive in.
And I guess I'd just like to say, I think we need to find a balance here between, the sky is falling, as you said, and
Yes.
oh, this isn't that big a deal. I think it's somewhere in the middle. And, I think we need to remember that this river got blocked for 3 days once by a landslide. And I actually watched
When was that?
1957, 58,
Oh,
I think.
jeez.
Yeah, big earthquake. The whole side of the mountain broke off. A bunch of people were killed because they were camping in their tents and were just buried under a landslide. It's a crazy story. Formed Quake Lake, which we all know is a great fishing location, but it used to be the canyon of the Madison. It was a beautiful canyon there before it sealed up. But actually watched a presentation on maximum and minimum flows, and as low as the Madison did get during this event, it did not get as low as it did for 3 days when it took the river 3 days to basically work its way through the landslide. And that's why the slide portion of the river is pretty much unboatable. I think.
Okay.
So yeah. So if you're ever wondering when you look up from Kelly's Place why it looks like, the wildest whitewater you've ever seen, that's why, because the river just cut its way through all of that stuff. And the trout came back. So we didn't have that severe an event. Obviously, we're just relying on natural reproduction now to restock the river, but the river will bounce back and hopefully soon.
Right, you got to have a little bit of faith, because once you lose faith in the water system, that's when things start to fall apart.
Trout are incredible. If you give them a chance, like all you got to do is give them a chance. You just got to give them a chance. If you give them a chance, it's amazing what they can do. They really are super well adapted to these environments. So we just got to give them the conditions they need, just like making sure a seed gets all the necessary nutrients and things that it needs, and sun and water. It's the same thing, but they take care of themselves if we take care of the river. So
I love that. No, you got to take care of their home. And Bill, is there an Instagram if people just want to follow on your journey, or maybe they have some questions?
Yeah, so you can follow me personally on Instagram at Wiwoka West, WIWOKAWEST. You can follow Montana Trout Unlimited on Instagram at just all spelled out, no spaces, Montana Trout Unlimited.
And I also have to say that sometimes when you feel like you can't be present to help out, organizations love money. So you can always donate to Montana Trout Unlimited, which I know that money goes towards, right?
Yep.
So if you can't be there, you can give the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, and we have some really awesome projects going on right now. We're finishing with the help of Winston. We're finishing and also Paul Mosley. We're finishing up the Willow Springs restoration on the Yellowstone, or on the Jefferson, I'm sorry. Willow Springs Creek is one of the main spawning tributaries of the lower Jefferson. And, it's been a legacy project of TU's for many years now, but it's a beautiful little spring creek. So we're finishing up that project. We have this really cool project going on in the middle fork of the Judith River, which is a little off of most people's radar, the Judith, but it's a really incredible canyon. Looks like a little mini Smith River, but we're relocating a Jeep trail there and minimizing some river crossings. It's going to be a really cool little backcountry fishery.
Oh my gosh,
So,
that sounds incredible.
yeah.
Well, I can't thank you so much for joining me again today, Bill. And like I said, keep up the fight and
Will do.
keep us posted on any updated information when it comes to the Madison or any other upcoming projects.
We certainly will. Thanks so much, Lauren, for having me on. And please give the Madison a break this winter.
Give it a break. We all need a break.
Yeah, no kidding.
Let it be your ex. Let it be your ex girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is. Just she needs her space right now.
Give her some space.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com, where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.